Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, the world waits for President Trump to decide whether to join Israel offensively against Iran.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war.
We'll discuss the impacts of potential U.S. involvement, both at home and abroad, with former Deputy National Security Advisor Meghan O'Sullivan.
Plus, the conflict is sending oil surging, with the threat of prices going even higher if Iran tries to block shipping through the crucial Strait of Hormuz. We have a look at how the industry is preparing with Mike Sommers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute.
And as Republican infighting intensifies over Medicaid cuts and the SALT cap deduction in the Senate's tax and spending bill, Democrats sharpen their attacks against it.
The Republicans have made clear they are willing to throw millions of Americans under the bus so they can help out a handful of their billionaire friends and those billionaire corporations. Democrats are here to fight back.
Still to come, our conversation with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts.
And the Supreme Court out with several decisions. That includes reaffirming a law that curbs care for transgender minors. Details ahead about the other cases on the docket and how the High Court's been ruling.
We begin tonight, though, with the latest from the White House, where President Trump is meeting with national security officials once again in the Situation Room. We found ourselves here at this time yesterday, and Bloomberg's Mike Shepard joins us now with the latest. Mike, everyone in Washington today seemed to wake up knowing what was going to happen. The president still has not made up his mind.
He still hasn't made up his mind, or at least that is what he is signaling to the public. He spoke with reporters earlier this afternoon and said that he would be meeting with his national security team again in the Situation Room starting about 4 p.m. Yesterday's meeting ran about 90 minutes, and he is trying to keep up this air of strategic ambiguity. He said, I may do it, I may not do it, when asked about moving militarily against Iran. Yet at the same time, while things are unclear, there are signs pointing toward something further happening in this crisis. We are getting reports from the region that the U.S. Embassy is evacuating non-essential diplomatic personnel and their families from Israel. We're also seeing the U.S. move even more military assets closer to the region. And we're also seeing Donald Trump tell reporters earlier today that he has spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in encouraging Israel to keep going in its attacks against Iran. And we saw further evidence of that late this afternoon with more Israeli strikes against about 20 military facilities in Iran. So all of this is sort of pointing towards something, but we don't know what. And we don't know whether this will be further diplomacy or perhaps some escalation on the U.S. side.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because we've also heard from President Trump that he could dispatch Vice President J.D. Vance, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. What do we know at the moment about the path for a diplomatic de-escalation?
Well, it's a great question, Tyler, because the president really until late last week had been indicating he greatly preferred a diplomatic solution. He had been pressing for a nuclear deal with Iran that would end its ambitions for obtaining a nuclear weapon and foreclose that possibility, including by prohibiting the Islamic Republic from enriching uranium. But in the past day or so, we've seen signs of frustration from the president over this. He has said that, Iran should have reached this deal. He came back in haste from the G7, and as he was doing so, he said it was too late. We're past the point of just de-escalating the current conflict. He really wanted some sort of a final resolution, something more than just a ceasefire. He wants this to end once and for all. He indicated this afternoon that Iran had approached the U.S. with an offer to meet at the White House, but Iran's UN mission indicated that that wasn't the case and that they would not be groveling at the gates of the White House. So we'll see whether there is any room for diplomacy once we see that this Situation Room meeting has broken, Tyler.
All All right, a lot to keep our eyes on. Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, thank you so much. And for more, we're joined now by Meghan O'Sullivan. She's the director of Harvard's Belfer Center and former deputy national security advisor under the George W. Bush administration. Meghan, thank you for joining Bloomberg Television and Radio. The big question, of course, at the moment is what is U.S. involvement going to look like? Can you take us into the room here? What are the factors that the U.S. is weighing as it makes this decision on whether or not to get involved in the offense?
Sure. Thank you, Tyler, for having me on the show. I would say, let's ask that question. What are they talking about in the Situation Room right now? I mean, this is a decision that is likely to be the largest foreign policy decision of President Trump's second term. That's my guess if he decides to go forward. And at this point, a decision not to go forward with military force also carries consequences. So I think they're considering a few things. First, I think they're assessing, is there a prospect for a diplomatic outcome here, as Michael just said. I think the probability of that is quite low, but it needs to be probed quite seriously because this is still the preferred option if the Iranians will agree to the kind of deal, which is now much more onerous than the kind of deal that might have been negotiated a few weeks ago. So is there any scope that this, the 1 minute to midnight moment could result in a deal? I think is obviously something that needs to be assessed and would be discussed. Presuming that their assessment is the Iranians are not prepared to go there, that there's a take it or leave it deal somewhere on the table, and the Iranians say no. The question of military force is not just a yes or no question. If the U.S. does decide to use force to basically disable Fordo, which is the largest facility that still has advanced centrifuges, that's deep in the mountains, that the Israelis are not able to take care of on their own, that's not the only question. The U.S. has to think about, should it just attack Fordo, or should it also attack facilities that the Iranians are likely to use in terms of retaliating against a U.S. strike? Because the Israelis have really degraded a lot of Iranian military capability, but it's not necessarily the same capability that might be used to, say, attack U.S. bases. Then there's the whole question of how is the U.S. prepared in the region to protect its assets and its people?
Well, it's interesting when you put all of this together, knowing as well another carrier strike group is on its way, Meghan, the USS Jerry Ford now steaming toward the region here. We know how many assets we've surged into that area, though the B-2 bombers were moved back to Whiteman Air Force Base, and I realize they can fly around the world with air-to-air refueling. But it makes you wonder what exactly our posture is now. We heard from the ambassador, Mike Huckabee, on X. Urgent notice, American citizens wanting to leave Israel. He writes, the embassy in Israel is working on evacuation flights and cruise ship departures. This crouched position can be kept for how long?
I would say that this position certainly does, it's not hours, it's days that this could be done. I think there's still the scope to explore, what needs to be done in the coming hours and maybe the next day or two, but probably not much longer than that. One question that I think hasn't been discussed thus far in the program, but is also relevant, is what is the Israeli capacity for continuing to protect itself against any incoming ballistic missiles from the Iranians? If that capacity is dwindling, then that might add a certain urgency. But otherwise, we're not seeing a situation where Iran is going to be able to get a nuclear bomb in a matter of days or a week. It certainly, still has the ability to do escalatory things, but it isn't something that if we don't see it tonight, it doesn't mean we won't see it tomorrow or the next day or even the day after.
Yeah.
Well, Meghan, even if Israel is able to make a significant move at Fordo or other nuclear facilities, our analysts at Bloomberg say that it would likely serve a devastating setback, but ultimately not a total end to Iran's nuclear program. Can you put into context here what we are dealing with moving forward? Would we risk Iran doubling down on its efforts, for example?
Sure. And I think, Tyler, you're really framing exactly the critical moment here, because for either the Israelis or now the Americans to move forward without disabling Fordo would be what I consider to be a very bad situation emerging out of the last several days of military force, because it would leave Iran with an undoubted impetus and desire to pursue a nuclear weapon, as it understands that it really needs a nuclear weapon to defend itself or to deter others, but it would still leave the capacity in Fordo there. There are other things that are needed, but there would be large elements of the capacity. So essentially, is there
anything beyond a B-2 strike, though, Meghan? What if we wanted to knock out power at Fordo to try to send the centrifuges into some different form of destruction? Is that possible, or it's got to be these massive bunker-busting bombs that only the U.S. has?
I think that the sense is that to really disable it for a longer period of time, it is going to require the military, the MOP, the B-2 bomber dropped bomb. Now, you asked me, what happens afterwards? Now, one of the reasons I said that it's still, even at this hour, if there is a possibility of getting Iran to agree to a very, very stringent agreement with pervasive inspections and no advance notice inspections, the IAEA in there, that's going to give the international community more confidence over the long run that Iran isn't developing a weapon. Because even if Fordo is set back significantly, there is still going to be the looming question, as long as this regime is in power, the looming question of, is Iran pursuing a nuclear weapon through other means in other covert locations?
It's great to have you with us, Meghan. We'd love to talk again. Meghan O'Sullivan, director of Harvard's Belfer Center, former deputy national security advisor in the George W. Bush administration. Thanks for the insights here on Bloomberg. The Fed today leaving interest rates unchanged, still predicting, though, 2 rate cuts by the end of the year. Here's Fed Chair Jay Powell on the outlook.
Uncertainty about the economic outlook has diminished but remains elevated. Many, many surveys say that. They do. So, and that's actually a line from the Teal book, which you can see in 5 years. Remember to check that.
Maybe the war will be over.
No, but if you think about it, tariff uncertainty really peaked in April, and since then has come down. And that's really what that's just acknowledging. It's diminished, but still elevated. That it's uncertainty. So I think that's an accurate statement.
The ink barely dry on the dot plot, and we want to look at how markets reacted to the rate decision today. Not a shocker here as we turn to world headquarters in New York with Romaine Bostick. No one seems surprised today, Romaine.
This market unchanged pretty much across the board for the major indices in the United States, unchanged when it comes to where we see Treasury prices, unchanged when it comes to where we see the dollar. But the big question going forward, Joe, right now is that uncertainty, and when that uncertainty starts to turn into certainty. 2 things to keep an eye on. He was asked about the situation in the Middle East, and he shrugged it off, basically saying that any sort of spike in oil prices, at least based on historical precedent, tends to be, and he didn't use this word, but he meant it, transitory. He also talked about a job market that in his view is still healthy, but he did say it's hard to find a job if you're out of work, but if you're in a job right now, things should be okay because right now employers aren't laying off anyone. The main takeaway from this big meeting, Joe and Tyler, is that basically the Fed is not going to do much of anything this summer. Maybe once we get to the fall, they start to make good on that dot plot and bring this market those 2 rate cuts that they penciled in.
All right, we'll be watching closely. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, thank you so much. Coming up, the Supreme Court upholds a curb on care for transgender minors. We'll bring you the details. But first, our conversation with Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. We have her reaction to the Fed holding rates steady after a long calling for Powell to cut. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
'Too late. I call him Too Late Powell because he's always too late. Am I allowed to appoint myself at the Fed? I do a much better job than these people.
President Trump earlier today, once again, criticizing Fed Chair Jerome Powell as the Fed keeps rates steady.
Thanks for joining us on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tyler Kendall. I'm Joe Matthew. We spoke on this Fed Day with Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, spoke with her just a moment after the decision was announced. And we got through a range of issues, beginning with the Fed's decision to hold rates steady. I started by asking her if she agreed with President Trump this morning, who today called for the Fed to cut by 2.5 percentage points.
Look, the president has painted Jay Powell and the Fed into a corner. And he's done it through self-inflicted problems to this economy. All of the chaos around the Trump tariffs have made it really hard to make investments going forward, to make plans going forward. Right now, Trump is leading the charge so that right here in the Senate, they're talking about doing a tax bill that will just once again add to the national deficit. They're talking about by trillions of dollars. And the president is openly speculating about maybe he's going to take the country into another endless war in the Middle East. And we watch there how that will drive up the cost of oil. It's already doing it. That in turn drives up costs for families, reduces investment, and shrinks the economy overall. So Donald Trump has really crowded the Fed into pretty much an untenable position. The Fed raises rates and they further soften the job market. They lower rates and they run the risk of igniting inflation. And that's the problem they've got right now. And it's all self-inflicted because of what Donald Trump has been up to.
So, Senator, for clarity, did you think that the FOMC should have slashed rates today? And if so, since you have long called for the Fed to cut rates, what's telling you it's okay to cut rates now, even if the FOMC doesn't think so?
Look, there's a lot of judgment call in this, but giving some signal that we're going to try to get down the rates on home mortgages, which affect costs for families, get down the rates, what it is that families are paying for consumer credit. I think that matters because I believe that we ought to be investing in families and that is how we best grow an economy. But I also confess that all of the chaos that Donald Trump has caused has really shifted the economic picture for the United States. 6 months ago, we had a strong economy that was flying in the right direction. Inflation was coming down. Now the Fed says today, it looks like it's coming back up. Job growth was strong. Today the Fed says, that looks like it's weakening. This is what Donald Trump has managed to do to the economy in less than 6 months in office.
President Trump called the Fed chair stupid a couple times today, suggested the Fed chair hates the President of the United States. Have you submitted a list of names to President Trump
for
Jay Powell's replacement?
He has not asked me for a list of names, but I really want to express some concern here. The nominees that I've met that President Trump has put in charge of our agencies that he's put in his cabinet, they're not screened for how much experience they have and what their views are on the intricacies of how that division or department would work. They are screened for one thing, and that is total and absolute loyalty to Donald Trump and just trying to please Donald Trump in every way possible. Think about what happens if that's how the Fed works going forward, just whatever it is that Donald Trump wants, no matter what the economic indicators say, no matter what reality says. If Donald Trump in his fantasy world thinks rates should go up, rates should go down, banks should be deregulated, having a Fed that is subservient to that voluntarily gives up its independence, will be an enormous cost to our economy and to the entire worldwide economy. We count on an independent Fed, and that also means an independent chair.
Well, and the Fed is, of course, also a regulator, and you are the ranking member on the Senate Banking Committee. And we had some new reporting out from Bloomberg News earlier today about proposed changes by regulators to reduce capital requirements under the enhanced supplementary leverage ratio. It's a key buffer for Wall Street's biggest lenders. I'm wondering how you think the Fed and other regulators should be thinking about this.
I think this is a terrible idea. What did we just talk about? We talked about the risks facing the U.S. economy right this minute. Trump's tariffs. Remember how we were going to have 90 deals in 90 days? We still don't have an inked deal anywhere around the world. And Trump, able to play red light, green light with tariffs for as long as he wants. We're looking right now at the Republicans trying to push through a bill that will do huge giveaways to billionaires and billionaire corporations, cut health care for at least 16 million people, and more to the point, blow a hole, an even bigger one, in the federal deficit. And talking about war now in the Middle East. You know, if you had any one of those three uncertainties facing the economy, that would be a time to say maybe we ought to be pushing the banks, you know, to pack on a little extra protection. But when you've got all three, the job of the regulators right now should be to be telling those banks, you got to have more capital to back you up, because it looks like potentially very stormy seas ahead.
Senator, we're still recovering from the last time you joined us here on Bloomberg TV and radio, because President Trump was live truthing at you that day about the fact that you agree on something, and that's eliminating the debt ceiling. This is a big part of the debate surrounding reconciliation, and I want to come back around on this with you again. Do you have legislation? Where's the bill, Senator, to eliminate the debt ceiling? Donald Trump would probably help you pass it, right?
I'm ready. I am totally ready to do this. I think it's time to do it right now. I'd like to get, and I'm trying to get some Republicans on board. We ought to be doing this, obviously, in a bipartisan way. We can't do it without Republican support, and we can't do it without Republicans agreeing to bring it up for a vote. It's not just getting one or two who would agree with us. We actually need the majority leader to say he'll put it on the floor so that we can vote on it. But I just got to say it again. I understand a lot of people think hell just froze over, but Donald Trump and I do agree. And that is that having a debt ceiling makes no sense at all for our economy. It's nothing but a tool there for political gamesmanship of people threatening to blow up the U.S. economy, to blow up our good name by defaulting on our debt if they don't get some kind of political concession. Look, I worry about where the Republican budget is going right now, but the time to make those decisions on revenue and the time to make those decisions on expenditures is in the budget. Not to say we're going to pass a budget, we're going to sign off on it, we're going to get the President of the United States to sign it, and then we're going to get into a fight, a political fight, on whether to raise the debt ceiling so that we meet our obligations on United States bonds, we meet our obligations to Social Security recipients, we meet our obligations on the paychecks for our military. No, we should just get rid of it. Trump is right on this.
Senator, you mentioned before, just going back to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. From your perch on the Senate Armed Services Committee, have you been briefed by the administration on this? And do you think that the U.S. needs to get involved in a more direct way?
No. No and no. The United States, our involvement should be to help de-escalate, to help deconflict. We should be encouraging both parties to back off, to calm down, not trying to throw more fuel on the fire and see if we can expand the conflict in the Middle East and drag America into another endless war in that region. I remind everyone, Constitution of the United States, the only government official that can actually declare war is the United States Congress, not the President of the United States. He should not be in the business of trying to escalate enough that he may think that Congress has no choice but to join him. The Democrats are very much opposed to starting another war in the Middle East. And they want to keep the United States out of this. They want to see the parties calm down a little here and get back to the negotiating table.
Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts with us on Balance of Power. Coming up, the latest flurry of Supreme Court decisions as the justices are set to finish out this year's term. We'll bring you the details next with Bloomberg's Greg Stohr right here on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
Welcome Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Joe Matthew, I'm Tyler Kendall. Breaking in the last 10 minutes, Bloomberg News reporting the Trump administration has urged the U.S. Supreme Court to turn away a request for fast-track review of his sweeping tariff plans. The administration says the justices should give the lower court more time to weigh in. The byline on that is, of course, Bloomberg's Greg Stohr. Greg, thank you for being with us. And this is a long saga when it comes to President Trump's tariff plans. What led us to this point?
Sure. So yesterday, one of the challengers, two companies that make educational toys, they had won a federal district judge ruling a few weeks ago, and they urged the Supreme Court not to wait for a federal appeals court to review their case, but to bypass that stage and take up their challenge right away so that we could get a ruling maybe as early as this fall. And then the Trump administration responded today.
I want to ask you about the ruling today on transgender, the Supreme Court upholding Tennessee's ban in this case on transgender affirming care for minors, to be clear. The court, though, the majority applied a more lenient test to scrutinize the law, which has some trans advocates hopeful this evening. Should they be?
I'm not sure they should be hopeful in the sense that their arguments were turned away pretty soundly by the Supreme Court, a 6-3 majority there, the conservatives all on the side of the majority. And what the court essentially said was the argument that these laws that say you can't take these drugs if you're a minor, that puberty blockers, hormones, for the purpose of treating gender dysphoria, which is that incongruence between birth sex and gender identity. Yeah. And the court said, no, that's not sex discrimination and not unconstitutional, because what the court is doing is saying you can't use these drugs for this particular purpose, for treating gender dysphoria. It's not saying you can't take them because you're a boy or a girl.
Greg, you've been incredibly busy. This was just one of a few rulings that we got today. Can you tell us what else you're watching out for in the weeks to come when it comes to other decisions that could come down? Yeah,
so there's a lot of Donald Trump stuff. The tariffs will be a big thing. We'll probably get some indication from the Supreme Court whether they will take up that fast-track challenge. The court is also dealing with Trump's restrictions on so-called birthright citizenship, the notion that a baby who's born here almost automatically, or in almost every case, becomes a U.S. citizen. 3 lower courts have blocked those restrictions. The administration is trying to let them take effect in at least part of the country. And we've got several other emergency Trump requests dealing with things like immigration and his effort to dismantle the education department.
Wow, it must be June. What do we have, 18 decisions left?
I've lost count, Joe.
I don't know how you do this. Yeah. Bloomberg's Greg Stohr, in the throes of the season, we thank you so much. And as tensions escalate in the Middle East between Iran and Israel, something we're talking about still this evening, the global energy sector faces renewed uncertainty. Earlier at the Japan Energy Summit, energy CEOs weighed in on the impact on global energy security. Let's listen.
Well, obviously, we're all watching very closely to understand what does this mean for the flow of energy to customers around the world, particularly the 20% or so of global oil and LNG that transits through the Strait of Hormuz.
Middle East consists 25% of global LNG supply. We now, as for the JERA, the 10% coming up from Hormuz Strait. It's not huge, though. Take into account our small inventory, the impact is huge. And we're closely watching the development in the Middle East.
Again, it's difficult to anticipate what the market will be. Our duty is to be able to have alternatives and to provide energy to our customers, reliable one and affordable one.
So let's get into this now for a closer look at how the energy sector is watching the escalation in the Middle East. A spokesperson for the industry, Mike Sommers, President CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. It's great to have you with us on Bloomberg. Good to see you, Mike. The nightmare scenario we keep hearing about is Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz. It's 15% of global crude oil supply. Is that what keeps you up at night?
It sure is. But the truth of the matter is the real story here is the dog that didn't bark right now. Because right now, American production is 13.5 million barrels a day. If we had a similar scenario in 2005 when the United States was only producing about 5 million barrels a day, oil prices would be through the roof. We've seen that before. in the two Arabian Gulf issues that we had in the 1970s during the Gulf War, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, energy prices were going up 2 times, 3 times as a consequence of those conflicts. Right now, we've seen about a $10 surge, which is concerning, of course. But it's because of American production and because of that energy dominance that we have now in the United States that those prices have stayed relatively low.
Well, I wanted to ask, should we be prepared, though, for more disruption? Should the markets be building in even more risk premium here since there is so much uncertainty?
Well, first of all, it's not in Iran's best interest right now to shut down these Straits of Hormuz. All of their oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz, and that's where they get most of their income. So we don't see it as a likely scenario at this time, but given the precarious state that the Iran regime is in right now, I think everybody should be watching the Straits.
It is pretty remarkable to see what we're about $75 a barrel here at last check, just over, up a bit today. After we saw Russia invade Ukraine, we went over $100 almost overnight. Are you surprised by this lack of reaction? Are we not whistling past the graveyard?
Well, let's think about it. When you put Iran production in perspective, it's about 1.7 million barrels a day. Russia is about 8.5 million barrels a day. Iran is just not that big of a producer on the international market right now. In fact, the state of New Mexico produces more oil per day than the whole country of Iran. Now, if they go after Karg Island, if they go after the Straits of Hormuz, of course we should be concerned about that. But in the long term, 1.7 million barrels a day is just not that much in the grand scheme when the world uses about 103 million barrels of oil every day.
Well, risking an oil price spike, as you're saying, if it doesn't happen, but it would be leverage for Iran. And this White House really did campaign on lowering energy prices. I'm curious, have you been in touch with the administration or the White House at all about what future action could look like going forward?
We have frequent conversations with this White House and with Democratic White Houses as well. We're certainly concerned about the global security concerns when it comes to oil prices. We're going to keep monitoring these issues, but American producers are going to continue to produce. The place that we're in today is historic levels of production in the United States. And when oil needs to be supplied, American producers always deliver.
I want to ask you about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, because there have been questions about refilling it against the backdrop of a potential energy crisis. I spoke this week with Bob McNally, the founder-president, Rapidan Energy Group. Here's what he had to say about refilling the SPR, something he's actually had a chance to do in a former administration. Take a listen.
Starting about 5-10 years ago, started selling off the SPR just because we thought we didn't need it. And then President Biden sold about 180 million barrels, when there was no emergency. Half of the reserve is full. Secretary's right. Right is right. We'd have to be slow to refill it. I was working for President Bush, and we did it through a royalty in kind program, and took us years to get back to the tippy top. I was there in the White House after 9/11. I was there for the second Gulf War. We've thought through the type of barrel flow and contingency planning, where are inventories, where's spare capacity, and the math gets pretty grim if we lose the Strait of Hormuz or Abqaiq, with or without an SPR.
Mike, Bob was referring to Secretary Wright, the Energy Secretary, who told us a couple of days earlier that it would in fact take years to refill the SPR. Do you agree with his approach? Would the industry look at this the same way?
I do. Unfortunately, both parties have abused the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. I've joked that it's actually the Strategic Political Reserve now. Unfortunately, President Biden abused it in ways that we have never seen before. And this is just the kind of crisis that we should be prepared for, with a lot of stocks in the SPR. And unfortunately, it does take a lot longer to refill the reserve than it does to withdraw.
Be repaired first, we
understand. It does. So many of the salt caverns where they keep these reserves are, because of how quickly they were withdrawing it during the Biden administration, they are damaged. And that is a huge concern. When oil prices fell to $60 a barrel, that should have been the time when we were refilling the SPR, because we should have anticipated that there would have been a crisis like the one that we're facing today, and we should have that backstop during times of crisis.
Well, we're talking about our domestic supplies, but how should we be working with partners globally when it comes to other energy stockpiles during times like these, when we could be leaning on others?
Well, this is exactly the reason why Henry Kissinger set up the International Energy Agency based in Paris. This is why the IEA was set up in the first place, to coordinate these kinds of issues and to make sure that every country had some kind of an SPR. We urge the IEA now to start thinking about what kind of oil needs to be on the market, given the current market situation and the tragedy going on between in Iran with Israel.
I want to ask you about the reconciliation bill that's making its way through Congress, which we seem to talk about every day around here. The big, beautiful bill has gone from the Senate with some pretty big changes back to the House. You've called it a tax plan that fortifies America's energy advantage. I presume you're referring to tax breaks, subsidies for oil drillers. We remember the meeting famously in the campaign that then candidate Trump had with big oil CEOs who said, donate $1 billion and I'll make it worth your while. It'll be a deal. Is this the fruit of that meeting?
Let me be clear. I was in that meeting. There was no quid pro quo. What the president said was, I'm going to be so good for this industry, you should consider contributing to this campaign. And he has been good for the industry, very good, particularly his focus on continued development in the United States. And I think you're going to see a consequence of that, which is more production in the United States over time. The tax provisions in this bill are very positive for American development, but it's not just the tax provisions. We also have historic access that is going to be granted, access to the Gulf of America, access to onshore acreage, access finally back in Alaska. So this is good not just from the tax provisions that are going to promote more development in the United States, but also from the perspective of more access to American resources.
Mike Sommers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Thank you. Now to other stories we've been following here at Bloomberg. Nippon Steel closed its $14.1 billion takeover of U.S. Steel. It creates the world's second largest steel maker. The Japanese-based company will now avoid 50% tariffs on imported steel. The company struck a national security agreement with the U.S. government. It allows the president a direct say in key business decisions, including reductions in capital investments, offshoring production, or changing the U.S. Steel name.
Also today, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s revamped immunization advisory panel set to meet next week now to discuss measles, mumps, and chickenpox vaccines in children under 5. Any decisions could have major implications. For American public health, experts worry any changes could erode public trust in science that has been considered long settled. The panel will also hear a presentation on a mercury-containing preservative used in some adult flu vaccines that's been wrongly linked with autism.
And President Trump plans to extend the deadline for TikTok to divest its U.S. operations. ByteDance, the app's parent company, will have another 90 days to find a buyer. It marks the third extension. Frank McCourt Jr., executive chairman of McCourt Capital, wants to make a deal with ByteDance. He had this to say earlier on Bloomberg.
One thing we do know is they're not going to let U.S. TikTok go with the algorithm or with the IP. If there's not going to be a deal and the only option is shutdown, why not sell the pieces and parts for a lot of money and achieve their objective, which is no sharing of their technology?
Coming up, we'll continue the conversation on the president's decision to push the TikTok deadline and have more on what's ahead for the Senate's tax bill when we assemble our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We are not going back on that agreement. And I think what the Senate needs to recognize, they can make changes, they can enter into negotiations, but the fact is you need 218 votes to pass this in the House. And there is not a chance in hell that this bill will pass at $10,000, let alone less than $40,000. I guess people, want to try and call our bluff. They tried that in the House. They tried to jam us, and we didn't fold.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tyler Kendall. I'm Joe Matthew. That, of course, Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York today. It was the early edition of Balance of Power. Speaking to the Senate's proposed changes to the tax deal and more specifically, the cap on salt. Let's assemble this evening's political panel. Matt Bennett is here, Executive Vice President for Public Affairs at Third Way, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, President CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Great to see you both, and welcome to the conversation. It's like Groundhog Day around here. We're going to do salt all over again. Mike Lawler seems serious. Sarah, should we take him at his word?
Absolutely. So he's a member of the Republican Main Street Partnership, as all the New York Republicans are, and they need 40,000. I mean, they are majority makers. So they're going to.
He's got leverage.
They have leverage.
Can't primary him with a MAGA candidate, right?
He cannot.
That doesn't work in New York.
Actually, Donald Trump needs Mike Lawler to announce he's running again in that seat because he's probably the only Republican that can hold that seat. If not, it may go to a Democrat.
Wow.
So yeah, Mike has a lot of sway.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Matt, the birdbath is now starting when it comes to this reconciliation package. Democrats are going to try to slow this down. How likely is it that they're going to get the changes that they want to see as the administration pushes? This is still going to get done by July 4th.
Look, I think some of the things will come out in the birdbath. There's some things there that are obviously don't pass muster under the reconciliation rules, but the likelihood is that the Senate will pass something. But as Sarah was just saying, it is not at all clear that they can get a deal with the House. And if they do, I think Senate Republicans need to think pretty hard about this, because what they're going to do is take away health care from at least 12 million people. They're going to massively increase the deficit, and most middle-class people are not going to feel a thing. So politically, I'm not sure this is the best move for them, but they probably will pass it.
We spoke with one of the Republicans in the Senate last night on Balance of Power, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who talked to us about why he is still a no vote on this bill. Listen.
Well, I'm currently a no. I think the House bill is something I basically support, but my problem is it just doesn't go far enough. At most, we'll be reducing spending by about $2 trillion over 10 years. We increased spending by more than $2 trillion in 1 year from 2019 to 2020. And, it's a budget reconciliation process. We ought to be talking about numbers.
The senator told us, Sarah, that he's got enough colleagues who are also prepared to vote no to kill this bill in the Senate. Do you take him at his word? Are there that many Republicans who are prepared to allow a tax hike across the country?
So now I think Leader Thune has the toughest job in Washington.
Okay.
I used to think it was Speaker Johnson. Yes, I do think he does have a group of colleagues that will vote no on this bill. So a lot of negotiations going to be happening.
Mm-hmm.
I've always said on the show, I still don't think it's going to be done by July 4th. Right. I hope it does. Yeah. But there's a long way to go here. And there's a lot of senators who want different things in the bill. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a real balancing act.
Mm.
So, Sarah, what is the timeline that you are eyeing? What is realistic at the end of the day for getting this done?
The last week in July is what I think. I support Leader Thune. I hope he does this. I think it's wonderful if he can get it through. But I think that right before they break for August recess will be the time frame.
When you hear this kind of talk, Matt, you start thinking debt limit.
Yeah.
If we push it that far, Democrats might be required as part of this conversation all of a sudden. This debt limit might have to be handled outside of this reconciliation bill.
Yeah, unfortunately, Democrats have the responsibility gene, and we don't want to intentionally tank the global economy by breaching the debt limit.
Republicans did write a pretty sizable increase in the debt limit.
Into this bill, but Democrats aren't going to vote for this bill.
True.
If there has to be a standalone debt limit increase, which would cause incredible chaos among the Republicans, some Democrats will vote for it because we just don't think it's just insane to allow America to breach the debt limit. I think Republicans will do everything they possibly can to avoid doing that.
So reconciliation obviously has been gripping Washington, but the other top story is we are waiting to see how the U.S., whether or not it gets involved in the conflict with Iran and Israel. And today, during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, Republican Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska asked Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth about whether the U.S. would get involved in striking Iran. Here's part of that exchange.
They had an opportunity to make a deal. They should have made a deal. President Trump's word means something. The world understands that. And at the Defense Department, our job is to stand ready and prepared with options, and that's precisely what we're doing.
So is this an opportunity now to reestablish deterrence the way it was done in the first administration?
Senator, I think we already have, in many ways, in this environment, reestablished deterrence. The question is, in the coming days, what direction that goes.
Sarah, I want to ask you, what are you watching closely here as we've really seen ambiguous rhetoric out of this administration about what happens here next.
So the president is talking to his cabinet and talking to a few of his top officials that are not in the cabinet, and they're going to make a decision. Iran has not really come and been a full player in this, so it's going to be interesting the next couple nights to watch and see what happens.
Are members worried that they might
support,
not have a say in this, or they give them the 30 to 60 days that
if it's very
for?
isolated,
Yeah.
which is what they're talking about, the members of Main Street do support that.
Where are you on this, Matt Bennett? We don't know what's going to happen in the next 24 hours.
We
Never
don't.
mind the next 24 days.
I will say, I wish somebody else was in charge of America's military. Democrats have no faith at all in Pete Hegseth. I mean, he was texting operational plans to his wife the last time we were involved in that region with the Houthis. That he can't get his kind of command situation under control in his own office. He doesn't have a chief of staff.
Bluster, though, or a White House that's preparing for war?
I don't know. I mean, I think this ambiguity is not serving anybody well. Hegseth said that, people take Trump at his word. What word? Where are we? He seems to be all over the place, as he is on Ukraine and so many other global issues. So no faith whatsoever in our leadership, plenty of faith in our military. If they go forward, they will execute the mission, but very worried about the civilian leadership.
Well, Sarah, and President Trump also did campaign in part on getting out of foreign entanglements. We saw some members, including Thomas Massie, come out against this. I'm wondering what your members are telling you about how they're going to thread the needle here, right? We saw J.D. Vance, the vice president, for example, post on X yesterday saying that he would support this, obviously, if it goes forward. But he was known to be somebody that didn't want the U.S. to keep getting entangled in these foreign conflicts.
They say that when they're electing it, when they're running, and they mean that. But it's a different thing to sit in the Oval Office and be faced with this. Iran was not willing to come and really negotiate. So I think the members right now will support if it's isolated. I still think this is more of an isolated. I don't think we're going to go to war. I think that's over the top. I think it's going to be an isolated incident, if anything at all. And maybe Iran will come to the table. Maybe he'll get a phone call tonight and say, okay, let's deal on this.
You wonder if
so
we're
hopeful.
If the MAGA community is going to support the president. Remarkable exchange today with Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson. The president's even calling out Tucker on Truth Social. Steve Bannon's been vocal. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tom Massey. You see all this. What's this going to mean for MAGA as we know it if American B-2s start bombing Iran?
MAGA's interesting. Who knows what really happens to MAGA? I mean, I've never predict what MAGA is going to do.
Trump is MAGA, right? You think
he is, and his supporters are. I think they come back around. I think his supporters will follow him anywhere. I think the MAGAs are very tied to Trump. If Trump has to do this for American security, they'll follow him. They'll fall in line.
Strange being on the same side as Steve Bannon here.
I am not on the same side on anything. But I will say this. I think Sarah's right that the likelihood is that the American strikes would be limited. There's no way the administration is thinking about putting boots on the ground. However, it isn't up to us whether this is isolated. It's up to Iran. They could start striking our troops abroad. They've got sleeper cells all over the world, probably here. They could use cyber attacks on us. They're very sophisticated. This could get very ugly in ways that we don't anticipate.
All right, Matt Bennett and Sarah Chamberlain, a lot to discuss. Thank you so much to you both.
Check out the Washington Edition newsletter to follow up on all the stories that we've been talking about. A lot to cover today. You can find it on the terminal and online. And we thank you for joining us here on Balance of Power. We're going to have a lot more to learn over the course of this evening. Keep your eyes on the terminal and the website. We'll be back tomorrow with much more. Great pleasure to have Tyler Kendall along for the ride. We'll do this again on Friday, right?
Thanks for having me, Joe. I'm excited to be back.
Absolutely.
After the holiday.
Juneteenth tomorrow. That means no market trading, but we'll keep tabs on what's happening here geopolitically and here at home. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.